Welcome to the ISM Rochester Lunch and Learn webinar series. We would like to say hello to all of our members and guests to our program. Please be sure to place your comments or questions in the chat function, as we'd like to make this an interactive event and we want to hear from you. We will also have a few poll questions today, so we ask you all to participate in that particular, in the two polls that we're going to be running today. Today's topic is great. It's supplier relationship management. And I'm so pleased to introduce my friend Graham Crawshaw, who is the Procurement Contact Director for CASME, who is joining us from the UK today. Welcome, Graham.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to mention Graham, just a few tidbits about Graham. He has the overall responsibility for the quality of CASME's Global Roundtable and Virtual Events program. Prior to joining CASME, Graham spent 20 years working in procurement for the music industry within the operational and marketing environment. And at EMI, Graham regularly supported major artists, including, which I love this part, the Beatles,
You do, don't
Queen.
you, Kathy?
I do, Pink Floyd, in
Mm.
developing and sourcing their unique packaging requirements, and subsequently worked on the company's first music streaming contract, which I'm sure was pretty exciting, especially at that time. Graham is also a fellow of SIPS. So at this time, I'm going to turn our program over to Graham.
Excellent. Kathy, well, thank you for, you always put on such an amazing introduction. I think, oh my goodness, I need to live up to expectations here, but delighted to be kicking off the 2024 program. My goodness, that who would have thought we were in 2024 already? So delighted to be here with you. Let me share my screen, which hopefully is now going to work, and you can see that. So yeah, from the introduction, you know that I've spent all my career in procurement. I'm one of these people that knew that spending other people's money was going to be such a great thing. I wanted to do it as a living, and in some shape or form, I've always spent my time in one sort of function of procurement. And so, yeah, it's great to be here to share with you today. The plan is, over this next hour, I want to very briefly set the scene to tell you about CASME, but more from the perspective of giving credibility to the information that I'm going to share with you. The main bulk of the presentation is around supplier relationship management. And anyone that knows me knows that I am a very practical person. I'm not an academic. Yeah, I may have all the qualifications, but I'm very much sort of, what do you need to be doing? How do you do it well? And I want to convey some of that information to you over this time, and conclude with time for questions and hopefully some answers. So yeah, there is the webinar system there for the Q&A. So please use that as we go through. And we've got a couple of polls to get a feel for it. So let me set the scene, because all I'm going to share with you today is as a result of surveys and conversations that have taken place. At CASME, we run over 200 events a year. And from those events, we're producing different documentation, different reports. So we've got a real good feel as to what is actually going on in procurement. And then we validate that with different benchmarking and surveys that we carry out. And we've been doing this for 20 years. I've not been with CASME all that time, but 20 years we've been collecting this information, having conversations, running events. And that really gives us quite a position within procurement. And we are global. I think you could tell from the accent, and Kathy said I'm calling from the UK today, just based personally. My home is about 80 miles west of London. But I spend my time traveling, and now that traveling's becoming more and more popular again since the pandemic, yeah, it's great to spend time with procurement teams in different parts of the world, recognizing the different levels of maturity, the different challenges that that procurement face. And it really is interesting when you see that the world has become a smaller place. and communications since the pandemic, because we're all using video conferencing, it's so much easier to communicate. And because of that, I'm convinced that the world of procurement continues to get smaller and smaller. And so, whereas a few years ago, there would be a fundamental difference in the way that procurement was done in one region compared to another, what we found is that some of the regions, like in APAC and to a certain extent Latin America, they've been catching up quite significantly and already applying some of the good practices that have been going on in North America and Europe. So very much procurement globally is moving forward at a very fast rate of knots, which actually makes it really exciting to follow. So CASME, the community is made up of over 240 companies, most of them large global organizations that have got procurement teams in different regions, different parts of the world, all category managers contributing to the debate and discussion that is going on. So that's the source of everything that I'm going to share with you. So re-emphasize that point. It's not me making this up. It's not me reading articles. This is coming from probably thousands of category managers right across the world. But you know, the one thing I really do like to emphasize about CASME is this slide here. And back with my procurement hat on, it is so important that information is credible. And so we do not have any suppliers, sponsors, or consultants impacting anything that we do. So all of this data has literally come from procurement professionals. No one's trying to sell you anything. No one's trying to influence. And so it does make it much more credible because of that. You don't want stuff sponsored. You really don't. That has an influence on the information. So that is CASME. That's the source of information. Supplier relationship management. You know, it's one of my favorite topics. So when planning this session with Kathy and looking at some of the topics that I could talk about, I thought, you know what, definitely want to talk about supplier relationship management. It is so important. To give you a perspective of how important it is, what we've got on the screen here is the results of a survey that we carried out across the 240 CASME members. And we simply said, look, what are your hot topics for 2024? It was carried out in October last year, so it's recent enough, and it's targeted looking at what people will be working on in this year. And I could talk all day about this, but I promise I'm going to keep it to the next sort of 40 minutes or so. But you could see how important supplier relationship management is on that descending list. It features firmly there with many of the other hot topics. But anyone that thinks that it's already been done or it's not important or it doesn't deliver value, then stick around as I explain how that's just not the case at all. And in fact, from a procurement perspective, it is so important to invest time and effort in supplier relationship management. So you can see where it fits in, and the categories or the challenges of hot topics above that include AI, subject for another day, ESG, we know that's controversial, the cost optimization, which includes going after cost savings and cost avoidance, and then top of the list, digitalization. So there's plenty to talk about there, but let's focus on the subject for today, which is this supply relationship management. I wanted to put it in perspective because look beneath that list and you'll see an awful lot of other topics that also are very important, but SRM very much high on the list there. We don't want to overcomplicate life. And I'm a great believer that supply relationship management shouldn't be too complicated. It's great to do, and I'm hoping that that will become evident if you're not looking at it. And let's face it, not every company takes SRM seriously. I know of some of the CASME members that throughout the pandemic didn't really focus on SRM. And the conclusion was that those companies that did performed better. Procurement did better. It was well received by the suppliers. So starting with the basics. So I'm going to assume that I'm talking to at least some people that perhaps aren't actively doing SRM. And we were asking the questions in the discussion about SRM. Well, what do you start with? Where do you start this whole sort of conversation? And I think the important point is you can't do this in isolation. Procurement can't suddenly decide we're going to do SRM. It has got to be something that's very much discussed within the business, and senior management want that to happen. So they want the value to be delivered by engaging with suppliers. So if you don't get that top level support, then in practice, it's going to be a really, really tough journey. Get the support, it becomes much easier. Depending on the maturity of your procurement function is also the other major factor. If you're still struggling with the basics, if you haven't got professional, that's probably the wrong word, sorry, if you haven't got strategic procurement in place, then going straight to SRM programs is going to be a challenge. So the maturity and also spend, depending on what your spend level is, you're looking to get the attention of your suppliers. So that spend level has got to be of a high enough level to make it interesting. So maturity as well. Once you've got your department set up, then you can say, you know what, we're going to actually invest in an SRM program. From all the conversations I've had, it's important to start by understanding your suppliers. So segmenting your suppliers, and we'll cover that off in a bit more detail as we go, but you're not going to do this to everyone. You've got to work out, well, which suppliers do I actively want an SRM program with? And in fact, one of my favorites is, I've already said, this isn't rocket science. You don't need tremendous academics to be successful at SRM. And for me, the basics come down to effective training and communication, both internally and with your suppliers. Then, if you're going to do this activity, you want to track it. I've got a couple of slides around the tools. But again, please don't get hung up on that you need some wonderful new system to help you achieve this. I know many of CASME's members that do very well by using Microsoft Excel. And I think to sum up what we're then saying about the basics is we're trying to look at those areas that go beyond just the negotiation around price. Everything else above that then starts to fall within an SRM program. So that's the basics, and we're going to build on that. But my experience is that this is where companies need to start. You got to walk before you can run. You got to take them in a logical sequence, but you need that initial buy-in from the organization to really make it successful. We are going to have the first poll because I'm very keen to understand from you how many suppliers are in your program. I thought I had thank you, Kathy, for helping me out here. So, very simple question. How many suppliers are included in your SRM program? And please just select one that is most appropriate, and we'll then get a feel. So how many suppliers? So recognizing and level of segmentation, recognizing you can't do SRM to every supplier, then how many are actually in your program? So I'll give you a few more seconds. So I'll just read that out. So it's either 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, or 50 plus. So let me just give you time to be able to answer that. Like a few more of you to respond, if that's okay. Then I'm going to show you the results from this same poll that we've carried out, just to give you a balanced opinion on this one. Just a few more. Anyone else contributing to this? I think in the interest of time, let's just end the poll there, and we can share the results. To be perfectly honest, we got 22 on the call at the moment, and I'm not sure how representative this is. In fact, only about half of you have been able to respond to the poll. So with all this information, yeah, you've got to take it with the background and the understanding of who has actually responded to this. I'm going to stop sharing and share with you the poll that we've carried out. So I'm not sure exactly how many responded, but it would be in the order of around 100 companies. And to be honest, the message I was trying to give was just to demonstrate that you can't do SRM with every supplier. If you do, it's not called SRM, it's just called supplier management. It's the relationship aspect that makes it special, makes it different and engaging. So for those companies, those people that respond to say it's 50 plus, I guess the question is 50 out of how many? If it's 50 out of multiple thousand, then yeah, that probably is about right. But I think the message here is that a lot of companies that responded to the poll on the screen now had got many thousands of suppliers. Those they were doing supply relationship management activity are actually very few, so quite a small number. So I think the message is, if you're new to SRM, really start small. You don't need to be doing it to a lot of suppliers. It's very much a question of like the quality of the relationship and the effort and the attention you're providing is going to make the difference in the way that you're working with suppliers. So actually, I quite like that, the result there, to really confirm that, yeah, it's a low number. And that's why the maximum on that poll was 50. I know it was 50 plus, but it's not going to be hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of suppliers. You know, I did once have a procurement organization that sort of tried to say that they did SRM to several thousand suppliers. And I'm thinking, you know what? You're not. You're kidding yourselves. You may be doing very effective supplier management, but not a full SRM program. So if that's the basics, let's move on. Why are you doing this? I think that's something that I know I've jumped into, starting with the basics, but let's look at why even consider supplier relationship management. What's the objective? Because quite frankly, if there's no reason to do it other than that nice, warm, fuzzy feeling of working with suppliers, then you're not going to be able to get the investment. You're not going to be able to spend the time on it. So we did some surveys and specifically looked at a number of areas, and this is the first one. So we said, look, what is the top 3 objectives you've got for supply relationship management? And I've got the list on the screen. We will be sharing this presentation just to make that clear. So all the data, very happy to have you look through that in the detail, because I think if you are looking to develop or improve your SRM program, then understanding what others are saying about what are the objectives, I'm hoping, is going to be helpful. That's the point of this session. No surprise when you look at the detail, this emphasis, 75% that responded, Bear in mind, it could have 3, so the percentages don't add up to 100. But the list, the line there that you can see right at the bottom, developing those long-term strategic partnerships. Throughout the pandemic, throughout the crises that we've had since the pandemic, whether it's been the Russia-Ukraine war, whether it was the utility prices, interest rates, inflation, what's next? Not quite sure what our next crisis is going to be. But either way, focusing on that long-term relationship, I think, is a very consistent message. Procurement does not want to be swapping and changing suppliers. It's much better to work with those strategic suppliers that you've got. Now, you may be sat there thinking, oh, Graham, he's stating the obvious here. But the challenge comes when suppliers perhaps don't quite work or go in the same direction that you're looking at. And we've had issues with companies saying that dilemma of SRM and direction from their CFO, which says, look, we need to cut cost. So procurement can sometimes be quite aggressive and almost against the idea of long-term relationships. But my argument is, just because you need to address issues around price shouldn't mean that the long-term relationship is jeopardized. And I think that's the skill of procurement. We're not going to talk about skills and talent today, but I think that's a key one. The ability to achieve both, the ability to be able to get what you need from a company business objectives, meeting the needs of your CFO, but also meeting the needs of the supplier and maintaining that relationship on a long-term basis. Linked with that, you've got some of the more practical aspects of ensuring critical and strategic categories that are going to be supplied. So digging you out of a hole when you're in a mess, yeah, very much part of SRM. And that was the key aspect during the pandemic that we saw with an awful lot of organizations. But take a look at some of the other points, and I won't read every slide out, but every point on that slide. But just look, when you talk about or hear things about innovation, it's that way of working with suppliers that's going to really add value and give you some of the benefit over and above perhaps other customers that your supplier is working with. So it's a mindset. So whenever you're having those conversations, even when you're in negotiation, it's that mindset of, does the supplier really want to be working? Do they accept? Do they really want that relationship to be long-term and supportive? And I think that mindset really then helps you achieve what you're looking to achieve. So hopefully on that list, there's a high correlation of some of the objectives that you've got with your company with the points on that list. And if they're not aligned, then at least it gives you something to think about. That's the objectives. Let's talk about some of the benefits, because it's only when you bring everything together do you then start to really click. It's almost like doing a jigsaw puzzle. There are so many pieces that go into working with suppliers that it's only when you've got almost that critical mass, that puzzle is almost completed and you can see the picture. That's the point that you realize, yeah, you know what, I've got all the benefits, not to the exclusion of the supplier, but actually mutual benefit for both. So this summary here on the screen is the result of a lot of conversation about the benefits from supplier relationship management. And of course, they're not all quantitative. There's a lot of qualitative, but isn't that procurement through and through? It's never as straightforward as just having a numeric dollar amount for the value or the benefit. You've got to take both the quantitative and the qualitative. And if that sounds really obvious, then if it was, I think more companies will be doing it, but that's really not the case. That's not our experience. Communication, very much top of the list there. I've already spoken about the importance of education and training, but communication, with the supplier so they understand what you're trying to achieve, and also the same with your stakeholders. I think procurement does an amazing translation service between business stakeholders and between suppliers. You're dealing with all levels, whether it's the CEO from the supplier, the CEO in your organization, or the operational individuals that are supporting the contract. But our ability to almost translate to ensure needs are met on both sides is a key skill and a key priority for procurement. So it goes beyond the conversation. It's really understanding what those objectives look like and make sure everything is aligned here. Now, of course, we've got areas of risk management and governance and compliance, all that stuff that so many within the company actually find quite tedious and boring, but nevertheless underpins the very strong relationships that are so important with suppliers. And that leads then on to opportunities in other areas, whether we're talking about diversity or innovation, and then fundamentally cost savings. So what I've seen over the last 6 months is procurement put a lot of pressure on suppliers because the balance of power is, well, it was in the supplier's favor in many areas up until about 9 months ago. And we saw it tip as procurement became more confident of its supply chains, more confident that it was in a stronger position to challenge some of the increases suppliers were putting forward, mainly because of interest rates and inflation. So that procurement did become more aggressive in the last half of 2023. And of course, anyone that disagrees with anything I say, please make a note in the chat. I'm talking as a generalization, having spoken to hundreds of procurement professionals. So if that is the case, then cost savings, as you saw from our hot topics list, very high, very important, but you still can maintain the relationships. And I think that's the clever part. It's how you do it, just to make sure that you could put the pressure on, but not jeopardize or destroy the relationships. That really is the summary of the benefits that you're going to get by having this program, having this approach to supplier relationship management. What's in it for your supplier? Let's take time to think about this. Don't just focus on what you need. Don't just think, well, the supplier is going to do what I say because I'm spending money. I'm a significant customer for them. Take time to think through what's the benefit for suppliers. You may need to spell it out for them. And I know many organizations have supplier days, supplier conferences. You may not want to go to that extent. You may not have the budget to do that. But everyone can think from the perspective of the suppliers. So there is kudos in being preferred supplier. Make sure that's known and recognized. Make sure that through the conversations it's possible to generate ideas and innovation. Make sure the supplier wants to come to you first. This is very much going to make life easier for the supplier. Don't do anything that makes it difficult for them. And I'm not going to talk much about payment terms, but I know that's one way to really wind up a supplier, and that is to not pay the invoices when you've agreed. I'm not talking about the number of days you're going to take to pay, but whatever you agree, stick to it. That is one way, definitely, to get your supplier working on side. Obviously, the promise of new business definitely is something that's going to get the attention of the supplier. What I find interesting is different parts of the world. If I'm having this conversation with some of our members in the APAC region, and certainly China, Singapore, those sort of regions, countries, the promise of work in the future. The promise of a higher volume is almost the top of the list for getting the suppliers' attention. I think in Europe and North America, there are other ways of engaging with the supplier that prove quite effective. But interesting, the power of extra volume, which is fine if you can deliver that. Not all companies can. You may be going through a bit of a recession yourselves. That may not be a viable alternative. So nevertheless, position what you can, either encourage with a carrot or even promise contractually. I'm often asked, where should SRM sit? Probably should have done it as a poll, but I didn't. There are three options that typically companies seem to focus on. Either you've got dedicated supplier relationship management professionals, those that have got the skills and the experience of really getting the best from the relationships. Arguably, it's a different set of skills to a category manager or to a buyer. Of course, you then need to be of a company that can afford the luxury of individual SRM managers. So the other option is, as the category manager does their role, SRM activity becomes very much part of that. This we can divide up. And I forgot to say, didn't I? In terms of the dedicated roles, companies can either do that locally, regionally, or globally. Again, it depends on the size. As far as category managers, if they're doing it, then you're not going to do SRM incorporating every category. It just doesn't work like that. There's just not enough high spend categories to justify it in all roles. Excuse me. But for some categories, subcategories, or on a regional basis, that can be a very effective way of doing it. Other companies, the third option really is stakeholder managers, who, almost like the SRM managers, are engaged, but for those companies that have teams really focused on the stakeholder, then they're ideal to conduct this bridge between the two roles. So those are the three that I see most common. And there is no right or wrong. I think it depends on the culture and the way that your organization is set as to what is most likely to be the way forward there. Okay, now I've spoken a lot about segmentation, that you can't do SRM to all of your suppliers. So how are you going to decide which companies, which suppliers you really want to invest in? So again, we've had a survey conversation across many hundreds of procurement professionals to get their input. And this is a summary slide. And of course, the top one is really obvious. Everyone says, oh yeah, it's based on the spend. Well, of course it is. If you spend a lot with a supplier, it is very likely they'll be on your SRM program. But that's not the only factor that should go in. And a word of warning, just because you spend a lot of money with a supplier doesn't mean they want to reciprocate. It doesn't mean that they will want to invest in the same way as you might. I'll give you some examples. I know a number of companies that spend a significant amount in contracts covering integrated facilities management, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But actually, it can be a very significant contract as far as the buyer is concerned. But as far as some of the major global players in FM, it's just another contract. So spend alone isn't enough to warrant being included in an SRM program. When we updated this information, or when we used to do it, risk never used to appear, but now very much firmly on the list there. So I think what we've seen in procurement is that heightened awareness of risk, the implications it has on everything that we do. So yeah, again, really interesting there, the perspective of risk and how that's impacting SRM. Of course, the other longest line looking at those is around the criticality. And you're going to have to determine what that looks like for your organization, how critical the supplier is. So you could get a supplier that maybe you don't spend that much money with, but is absolutely critical to the operation, to the success, or look at it the other way around. If that supplier fails, you're in a right mess. And I think that's something that procurement has learned since the pandemic, the importance that it's not just about spend, it's that situation of which suppliers really are critical to the business, and that if a supplier either decides to pull away from the contract or can't perform the contract, then you're going to be in a mess. So that in itself may be reason to really want to work closer with them so that you understand all that is that's going on. Of course, I'm not going to go through the list there, but you can see there's quite a number of criteria. And I think what I'm learning is it's getting more complex. So the complexity of segmenting suppliers is becoming more and more involved. So hopefully that's a useful checklist for you to see. We did a piece of benchmarking looking at the benefits of investing in tools. And I thought I wanted to share this with you because, yeah, we're all talking about digitalization. Remember, that was right at the top of the hot topics list. But when it comes to supplier relationship management, the benefit that you're going to get is quite way down the list. And I think the reason for that is there are other priorities elsewhere. Companies are still wanting to focus on spend analytics, wanting to make sure their data is clean, understand where they're spending money. So the act of trying to manage everything through SRM on a system is a hard one to put a business case together for. So I think that's quite nice to be very open and blunt about that. It's not easy to justify investment in tools specifically for SRM. You can't always work out whether hard cost savings have been achieved through SRM or through some of the other programs and activities that you're working on. So I do know many companies struggling to get the appropriate funding to really justify investment in that area. And let's face it, the tools that are available, without mentioning any of them by name, there's a lot of frustration that actually the SRM module is not that great. So again, disagree by all means. I'm just reporting some of the details that I've heard, having had many conversations. That said, whilst the specific focus on SRM, it tends to be SRM bolted on with a module. What I do show on the screen is no recommendation whatsoever, but a statement of fact of which tools are being used by CASME members. And so if you've got an interest, then again, check out those organizations. But you'll see Excel is there. Microsoft Excel, what would we do without it? Some would also probably put Power BI alongside that. Those Microsoft tools can be very helpful just to track and monitor the engagement on certainly something like supplier relationship management. Let's do another poll. Make sure everyone's still with us on this. So, Kathy, let's do the second poll. And this one is recognizing that this isn't easy doing SRM well. It's challenging to implement and maintain a program. So please select the choices on this one. And in fact, ideally select 3. First of all, what are the 3 challenges? The lack of commitment from stakeholders and senior management, resistant to procurement's involvement, inadequate recognition of procurement as a strategic role, limited resources, inadequate visibility of data, category managers working in isolation, trying to do all this activity, Cost reduction being a higher priority, and a lack of alignment somewhere along the line. So this is really going to be quite an eye-opener. As I've said, you want to fit in SRM when it's appropriate for your organization. And I think this chart is going to really highlight it's not easy. It's not easy to do. There's a lot to get right. There's a lot to have aligned and right first before going to this level of detail in developing your relationships. I'll give you a few more seconds. I need some water. You know what? I've had this horrible cold for the last 3 days. And yeah, it really is not great when trying to talk, is it? So need plenty of water to keep me going. The good thing is, at least over Zoom, you can't catch anything, so so it does have its advantages there. Right, let's end the poll and share the results. And we've got quite a mix of responses. The longest lines being around the lack of commitment, limited resources, and then the next tier down talk about the data, the cost reduction being prioritized, and the lack of alignment. Appreciate you being very honest and open about that. I think it's very easy for me to sit here and say how wonderful and how beneficial SRM is, but there are many practicalities that make it difficult. So thank you for letting me, at least you all know that you got the same sort of challenges there. Let me share when we've asked that same question to many hundreds of category managers. And you know what? We got a similar response, haven't we? We've got that issue around limited resources. There are only so many hours in the day. And I appreciate you taking time to join me today for this. But there's only a limited amount of time. We've also got issues, the lack of commitment. SRM, is it too fluffy? Is it too woolly that people want you focused on pure cost savings? And it starts to become a difficult one. But what I am saying is for those that are in the right position, that can actively move forward with some of the ideas that I've been sharing, then the feedback is, yeah, it is highly beneficial to do that. So in terms of what can you do to overcome some of these challenges? Again, this has come from hundreds of procurement professionals. So just summarizing this, I think case studies. I don't know if you use case studies to talk with your stakeholders, but in addition to hard data, telling the story, telling the example of when a supplier has helped you out or you've been able to achieve something is a great way to get it across. And so I'm finding that procurement is more and more telling those stories, using case studies to get stakeholders to think and tune in to some of the challenges. Of course, you've got to have the metrics, and I've got a slide for metrics to help you out on that one. The meetings, the engagement with suppliers, this isn't rocket science, but it does take time. So time when you meet with your supplier to have an agenda that isn't about giving them a hard time because they were late or because costs have gone up. Have a conversation that is purely relationship management based. And the experience I've got is for those companies that have got that in place, then it's a different approach. The suppliers aren't concerned that you're going to be giving them a hard time. They genuinely open up and recognize what you're trying to achieve. So where it becomes with a supplier that's perhaps less willing to participate, having those meetings clearly distinct between the operational, strategic contract meetings and the more innovation supplier relationship meetings is a very good and effective way of carving that out. You then have got the challenge and the responsibility to make sure that those meetings remain separate and that you don't try to bring in some operational issues when you're talking about relationship management challenges and the future there. Training. I can't emphasize the importance of training, both internally and with your suppliers. The chances are you need to guide the suppliers. They may be dead suspicious. That's the other point. They may not trust you immediately. Why would they? If you've always had that relationship where you've been quite aggressive with the supplier, then it is going to take time to demonstrate that you are genuinely willing to move the relationship basis in line with some of the SRM programs. So it may not be immediate, it may take time. And in fact, the research that we've done is implementing an SRM program is probably a 3-year process. If you try to rush it, then yeah, you'll get some success, but it definitely will be harder to achieve that. Don't expect this to be done as a 3-month project. KPIs. Don't we all love KPIs? You've got to have them, and you've got to measure what you're going to achieve. So wanted to share with you some data that we got here in terms of which key performance indicators are in place specifically to measure the effectiveness of supply relationship management. Now, of course, they can't all be quantitative. So depending on your organization, if your organization doesn't let you do qualitative measures, then it's going to be tough. You can't necessarily just bring it down to quantitative. And my experience from talking with people about this is the danger is you try to say, well, we've achieved cost savings of X down to SRM, we've achieved X or Y based on negotiation, based on e-auctions, based on the value of the system that we got in place. You can tie yourself up in knots trying to carve out value that is being achieved from the supplier according to different programs you've got in place. And I just say, you know what? We're getting too complex. Keep life simple. The business, you've achieved a saving as a result of all the initiatives. Please don't waste time trying to carve it up, but just accept that, yeah, value because of the way you're working with these strategic suppliers is definitely coming to your organization. That's the message I wanted to get across. Let me stop sharing, and then we can just have a chat. Remember the point I made at the start. What I shared with you, I've not made this up. This has come from probably thousands of category managers, admittedly across the world, so it's not just in one region, but summarizing their input and their contribution as to how they are developing SRM programs. So I hope, as always in my presentation, I've given you something to think about. I can't give you the answers, but it's got to be something that you can think about relevant to your organization, the culture, the way that you work, the way you interact with your suppliers. So hopefully I've just given you something to think about and be able to use in your own organization. That was the objective. So yeah, hopefully that's been of interest.
Oh, definitely. We do have a question for you, though. We have a
Okay.
question. How do you measure some of the KPIs that on the surface look to be an objective opinion?
Great question, Pat. Thank you for that. To be honest, I don't know. I'm not going to make it up and say I've got an answer for everything. That looks really difficult. Because you're absolutely right. Some of this is quite fluffy. My experience, though, is yes, it may be fluffy, but over the long term, you then start to see that the supplier working with you does start to contribute, and you can identify through simplification, through working together, that you've got a hard cost saving. I like cost savings and SRM to be very much a joint conversation, but it may not be an easy calculation. So yeah, an objective opinion. Yeah, totally agree. I would say some of them do look just like different opinions, but I think it's through time and working with suppliers that then maybe it starts to become more hard data. I don't know. I'm not going to waffle on that because I'd hate to mislead. Yeah, it's a tough one.
No problem,
My
Patsy.
goodness,
Thank you.
first one of the year, and look at the tough questions. My goodness.
You
Oh,
stumped them.
I normally have that. I prefer the easy questions first, but no, joking aside, I'll be blunt and honest that yeah, I can only give a response as I see it. Either my brain can't work quick enough, or there just isn't an answer. I think that's often the challenge with these things.
Definitely, definitely. Since it's objective anyway.
So, what were your thoughts, Kathy, in terms of some of the things that I was sort of getting through? What's your view on SRM?
Well, actually, from my point of view, since I'm in more of a nonprofit and more of the association management,
Hmm.
I don't really see, I'm not actually involved in that portion,
Okay.
unfortunately,
Hmm.
but because I have a different type of uh, job.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not really, I'm not actually in the corporate environment you know, to really have tons
Okay,
of
let me ask it a
suppliers.
different way then. Do you think it makes sense? Do you get that through some of these ways of working, it really can improve the relationships which actually deliver the benefits to the organization?
Oh, definitely, definitely, because I think the collaboration is the biggest part of it.
Yes. Yeah, I think yeah, and it's really difficult, but you've got to have the right attitude and an openness to make that collaboration work. Because let's face it, the suppliers will start off being very suspicious of you. I think that's yeah, that trust needs to be established and built up. You can't just go and issue a memo, an email, and expect the suppliers going to say, "Oh yeah, they're operating an SIM program. Of course, we'll want to." Cooperate and work on that. You've almost got to live by and demonstrate. I think that's a challenge when you're also under pressure from your CFO to cut costs by 10%.
Definitely. We do have another question. Is it more
Yes,
beneficial to focus on top 5 or top 10 suppliers from a spend perspective?
I think you've got to select the number of suppliers that you can cope with. It's a great question, Julie, but I don't know how much time you've got to do some of these SRM activities. If you can only look at your top 5 and you need to add in some more because of criticality or for some of the other reasons on that list, then that's great. I think start off small number so that you can make a difference. And I do know some companies that say, look, we can only do SRM with 3 suppliers. And I think if you can then prove to your stakeholders that you've achieved some value, then you can add another supplier or 2 to that list. And that's why I wanted to do that poll. Don't rush to go and do a ridiculous number, taking a pebble dash approach, if that's a word you'd use, but don't try to, or scattergun, don't just try to go after every supplier. Really be thoughtful and say, look, it's the start of 2024. We're going to really encourage and engage with 5 suppliers this year and really see what we can do and make a difference by engaging and doing some of the things that I've been talking about over the last 50 minutes. And you'll see for yourself that it works. I think that's the point. It does definitely work, but it does take time and effort, and yeah, that becomes a challenge for procurement. But yeah, don't think you've got to do it for a lot of suppliers. I think it's about having a small number and really making a difference working with them. And recognizing you're probably doing a lot of this anyway to your major suppliers. But I think there is still aspects of that engagement that if you formalize it, really does help both with your stakeholders and with your suppliers.
It'll help in the bottom line,
Yes.
right?
And it's
Yeah.
fun. I must admit, that's the other point. I probably should have had that on the slide. It's great fun to work much closer with some of the suppliers like that. And they like that, the attention that they're getting So there's all sorts of those benefits that that come from that approach. But
So
yeah,
if
focus
somebody's
on the
starting,
relationships.
so Graham, if somebody is just
Mm,
starting an SRM program, do you have
yes.
any advice for them out there as far as how are they supposed to, what's the best way for them to pick maybe a few suppliers just to start it out?
So I think I would focus on the spend. If someone in your company then says, "Oh, there's another supplier that's really critical for whatever reason," but focus on those suppliers that really are probably going to more likely pay attention to what you're saying. And I would say, look, let's set up a meeting. We're not talking about operations, we're not talking about contracts, we're talking how we can improve the relationships and what value that can bring. And I think that's a great starting point. And then see where those conversations take you.
Yep, yeah, because I've been doing a lot of SRM programs last year, and
Right.
we're going to be doing another one shortly with the New Jersey chapter, and they're going to be tying all the pieces together as far
Right.
as
Mhm.
to show, how it all ties up together and the results.
Fantastic. No, that
So I
sounds
think,
good.
so
Mm,
so everything that you were saying is actually, helping us to start the program, but then realize, the value there and the reason
mm,
for doing it in the first place.
absolutely. So yeah, hopefully giving you something to think about. That was the objective from this session.
Definitely. And I love all the results that you gave us, the polls, the information from the members from CASME is really
Right.
valuable to everybody during this program. So thank you. Oh, can you recommend a good book on this topic that shows best practice? I don't know if you have any books, Graham.
You know what? The problem with books is they come out of date, get out of date so quickly. So, in fact, no, I can't say I have read any book. Maybe I should write one.
That's
There's
what
an
I mean.
idea.
Did
But
you write
to be
one? You haven't
perfectly
written one.
honest, no, and again, because I'm not an academic sort of person, I really do like the practicalities. So, we'll send the presentation, but I'm afraid there isn't a book that I even know of, let alone one that contains best practice. A lot has changed over the last 3 years. I think if you were talking, or if I was talking about SRM 8 years ago, pre-pandemic, some of
Mhm.
the things I'd be saying would be significantly different. So I think now, yeah, it's changing so much. I just don't think there are the written texts that would cover it. Someone may correct me on that, but I certainly haven't seen it. But maybe I should write one down.
I think you should. I think you should write a book. I really think you should,
Yes,
and
there's
then
an I. Oh, I haven't
bring it
got the
back to
patience,
us, and we'll.
Kathy.
But thank you so much. The only thing I've actually seen a lot of difference, especially since the pandemic, is the collaboration that I've seen of the strategic partner. So to me, it's all for the positive at this point.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you for coming to us today and listening to Graham and his topic on supplier relationship management. And next month, we're actually going to do a topic on the psychological negotiation. So that's going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. So at this point, I'm going to end our program and I'll be sending out the recording and see you to everybody a little bit later. And of course, Graham's going to provide his presentation as well, so you'll get that as well. So thank you very
Fantastic.
much for joining us and have a great day, everybody. And thanks again, Graham.
Great. Thank you. Good to see you all. Take care then. Bye
Bye-bye.
then.